Welcome back to part 2 of 7.5 to 7.6 notes. These are 2 more questions. They're kind of the same idea, but we have to just use a different ratio. That's the only difference. So first, if we find our Q over here, we can't use the P, but we can use the 34. So the ratio that uses adjacent and hypotenuse is our cosine. So our setup is going to be the cosine of our angle. So cosine of 64 equals the adjacent, that'd be my Q, over the hypotenuse of 34. So remember, when we cross multiply, put it over 1, and then you can line up the different pieces together. So 34 times the cosine of 64 equals our 1 times our Q. So this ends up being just whatever this is typed in the calculator, and that ends up being a 14.9. So when we want to find the P value, we see that we have the opposite side of the 64 and we have hypotenuse. So the one that uses opposite and hypotenuse is the sine. So that means that my setup would be the sine of 64 equals opposite. So that would be my letter P over the hypotenuse, which is 34. Again, put it over 1, and then you can cross multiply. So again, we end up with a 1P equals, and then my 34 times the sine of 64, and I can type this in the calculator. So P ends up being a 30.56. So I'd like you now to try work out the next one to find the M and the N. Remember, label the sides so that you can pick out which pair of the ratios you need to use, and then when you're ready to check your answer, push play. For the first labels, if I just want to find the letter N, all I need is the number, so the opposite, and then my letter N, which is the hypotenuse, and that uses the sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So my setup should be the sine of 50 equals 8 over N. When I put it over 1 and I cross multiply, this is where you might have noticed that you get something a little different. So you get sine of 50 times N equals my 8. So you have to divide both sides by sine of 50 like we had with the tangent before. Oops, there we go. So then this is the part you need to type in your calculator. So for the N value, you end up with a 10.44. So double check to make sure you got that in your calculator. Then if you label over by the M, we get adjacent, and we still need to use the opposite. So the one that uses adjacent and opposite is going to be the tangent. Sorry about that, I had typed it wrong on my paper or on my screen. So we're using the tangent, so we need the opposite and adjacent, so our 8 and our M. So we should have tangent of 50 equals your 8 over M. And this is going to be set up similar to the N. So when you cross multiply, we have an M times the tangent of 50 equals your 8. So you need to divide the 8 by the tangent of 50 in your calculator. And your M value in the N comes out as 6.71 for your final answer. In this one, we have 2 new vocab words, the angle of elevation and angle of depression. So angle of elevation is if you're standing right here and you're looking to the top of this tower, that's where your eyes are going, that the difference from the horizon to where you need to look up to the object, that angle that's created there is the angle of elevation. So, because think of you're elevating your eyes up. So then, in the exact opposite, if you're up high and you're looking at something down low, think of yours looking straight out, that's horizontal. So the angle that it creates when you have to look down at the object, that's the angle of depression. So something I want you to notice right here, this is a picture that comes from our book, is if we have these 2 horizontal lines, so think of 2 different people. For one person, it's the angle of elevation. For the other person, it's the angle of depression when they're looking at each other. And if these 2 lines right here are really parallel to each other, because think of that is the horizon, they're both horizontal lines, that the names of these 2 angles right here are alternate interior angles, and we know that alternate interior angles, when we have those parallel lines, are going to be congruent to each other. So yes, those 2 angles that are shown are going to be congruent. So if you have an angle of depression and you've got a triangle that you need to be dealing with, let's think of this blue triangle right here, that if they give you the angle of depression, that we can actually put it down here in our triangle because they're going to be the same. All right, so here's an example of our angle of depression. So we need to draw a little picture. So you need to draw a hot air balloon over a tower and then a car off in the distance on the ground. So here's my little drawing, and we have that the hot air balloon, that the angle of depression is 40 degrees. So think of from the line of sight out here, that this angle on the outside is 40 degrees, but because this bottom line and the top line are parallel to each other, then we know that this angle right here is also going to be 40 degrees. So then we know that the balloon is directly over the water tower, and it is 5 kilometers from the car, and we need to figure out what the altitude, so what our height of the balloon is off of the ground. So then we need to go through and label based on the 40 degrees. This is an adjacent side, and our x is our opposite. So the ratio, the trig ratio that uses opposite and adjacent is tangent. So next we need to plug our values in there. So we have tangent of 40 equals our opposite, so our x over adjacent, which is our 5. We need to set up to cross multiply, so put it over 1, and then you can multiply the opposite pieces together. So 1x equals my 5 times the tangent of 40, and since 1x is still just x, then this part I need to type in the calculator, and with that I get 4.195. So I could say, since I need to round to the nearest tenths, that's one number after the decimal place. So right there, so I'd say 4.2 kilometers would be my answer. So for how tall, how many meters, kilometers off of the ground that hot air balloon is at. All right, for this last one that you are going to try, I would like you to draw your picture, label everything, and then once you've got it all set up for the x and the y, so the two different values that you're asked for, then you can push play. So here's my picture with my ladder leaning against the house, and it says that the angle of elevation for the ladder, so the base of the ladder, is 50 degrees. So that's our 50 down here in the corner. And then we want to find out how long the ladder is, so I'm going to label it as my x. And then we also need to find how tall or how far off the ground the ladder is that's reaching up against the house. So I'm going to label that as my y. So we have two different setups that we need to find. You can see now that I have my 7 feet, so it's 7 feet away from the edge of the house. My y is the opposite, my hypotenuse is my x, and then my 7 feet is my adjacent. So if I wanted to find the x first, then I need to use my hypotenuse, and that number I already have, so hypotenuse and adjacent. You should have used then, let's see, that would be cosine of our angle. So adjacent over hypotenuse. So you should have done cosine of 50 equals your 7 over your x. When you cross multiply then, you get your x times the cosine of 50 equals your 7. So when you divide, you have to take 7 divided by your cosine of 50. Sorry, that's getting a little sloppy there. So your x value should end up being 10.89. So since you have to round to the nearest tenths again, so one number after the decimal place, it's 10.9 feet, and that's how long your ladder is. Then to find what the y value is, you are using opposite now and that adjacent. So the one that uses opposite and adjacent for the y would be our tangent. So our tangent of our angle is always opposite over adjacent. So we're going to have the tangent of 50 equals our y over the 7. Put it over 1, cross multiply. So we get 7 times the tangent of 50 equals our 1y. So then we just have to type this in the calculator. So y itself, sorry, that was a little sloppy there. Y ends up being 8.342. So when I round that then, I get 8.3 feet when I go to the nearest tenths place. So this is how many feet it is off of the ground where it's leaning up against the house. Since you've made it to the end of the video, if you'd like another additional bonus point, if you heard the other one, then put a smiley face down here in the far right corner of your paper. So a little smiley face, and I'll give you an extra bonus point. Thanks.